Are you using too much cannabis these days to get the same effect that you used to get? We're going to talk about how to keep your pharmacy costs low and your benefits high. Get it? Today, we're going to be talking about resetting your tolerance to cannabis use, specifically THC use. If you're a patient who uses a lot of cannabis to get the same effect you used to, it's really important to take a break to try to reset that tolerance. Kylie, do you have patients that come in and they're like, look, I just can't afford the medicine. I'm using too much. What do you tell them?
Always to take a tolerance break. What that tolerance break looks like is different for a lot of my patients.
What do you start with?
I generally tell them a few days. Some of them don't want to wait a few days. They'll ask me things like, can I still use CBD during it? I tell them yes, as long as they will take a break from the THC. Whatever will get them to take a break is pretty much what I'm agreeable to.
How long do you think, how often do you need to take tolerance breaks?
So again, it's different for every person, but I think you need to do it every, 5 months.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like this about what I'm telling my patients too, about once a quarter.
Yeah.
Once every 3-4 months, take a couple of days off. And we have a reset your tolerance guide. Before I get into that though, Blake, why is this necessary to take tolerance breaks? What's happening in the body that we're getting so used to the THC?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's necessary. What I know is this. As you keep upping your concentration, you're going to spend more money. It's going to take way more to get the therapeutic effect than when you started. And those are probably the biggest reasons to take a tolerance break, to set yourself back at a base level or at least a low level, because it's just going to end up doing worse for you in the long run. And then as far as like CBD, still taking things, what I would say is when you look at cannabinoid therapies, you're looking at exciting molecules or molecules that are going to be an agonist that stimulate specific neural pathways. So THC mimicking dopamine, for example, CBN that mimics somatin pathways and so forth. Whereas if you look at like CBD as an inhibitory molecule, so it's going into multiple pathways, but it's not getting a cognition. So you're not going to develop more and more neurotransmission receptor sites using CBD, whereas you will get more and more dopamine receptor sites by hitting more and more THC. So what you're trying to do is have the body reset your absorption.
Really important when you're taking THC that you consider it like a bell curve. The more you take, the more you feel to a certain point. But then when you get over that bell curve, you're just increasing your tolerance without getting more therapeutic effect. So if we could start there and we could have patients using like the right amounts, then it seems like there's less need for a tolerance reset later because we're using the right amounts to begin with. We're not like pushing the limit of THC.
That's right.
You feel like that's and then when it comes to other cannabinoids, because they're modulating, they're stimulating on one hand, they're inhibiting on the other. THC is not so much of that homeostatic molecule.
Yeah, I mean, so you're stimulating a specific neural pathway versus something that is actually inhibiting signals from coming in. And so, I was joking with you earlier about this, but like you want your sick fire to be a firestorm, not like a sick fire ember.
Do you find that there are products, Kylie, that are more likely to cause this, need for a tolerance reset?
Dabs, stuff like dabs.
All these really heavy
those really strong, concentrated. Even the really concentrated syringes. If you're just using a bunch of those every day, I know some people have a tendency to use them kind of like an RSO almost, and I think they will come to tolerance more quickly than if you're just using some flour that's in a reasonable THC level, and reasonable is different for everybody. I'm just thinking of my reasonable.
Well, and responsible use of an RSO, for example, is a ramping period actually. And so if you're just trying to like come back and say, well, I'm going to treat myself with a syringe or, you know, like a distillate syringe or something or another concentrate, you're actually missing the boat of what you're trying to accomplish in the case of like an RSO specific use.
So when it comes to concentrates, when it comes to these different products that are raising our tolerance, we want to keep the dosing therapeutic as much as we can, right? We want to take tolerance reset breaks. I recommend my patients take a tolerance reset break at least once every 3 months. We start with 2 days off of cannabis completely, and then we start back on day 3 with 50% of what used to be their normal dose. And we have a tolerance reset guide that you can actually find at utahmarijuana.org/guides. And you can download it and follow along with a 6-day reset guide if anybody is interested. I'm really also interested in you commenting below about what you use. I found that some people take a couple of days off every month. Some people take a couple of days off every 3 months. Some people, like you say, don't necessarily need to take tolerance resets.
The other thing I would say that's really interesting is for certain conditions, you got to be really careful about stopping your medicine outright.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, one of the things that you can do in terms of a tolerance break, if you can't stop taking your medicine, is switching delivery methods. So if you're used to doing, you know, very high concentrated flower, back that flower off a little bit with a less concentrated flower. Or, you know, if it's a vape cart and you're, you know, killing a vape cart a day, back that off and do a less, you know, concentrated form of a vape cart. Just changing your methodology, changing your delivery. So you're not literally hurt, you know, you're still getting your medicine, but it may not just be at the concentration levels that you've been traditionally taking.
Sure. Okay, Blake, explain the physiology about the receptors and how many and why, about this tolerance and why we really need to take these tolerance breaks, or why we might need to.
Well, let's use an example. Let's take alcohol consumption, for example. So you have a liver pathway that is actually designed specifically to deal with alcohol, and that's alcohol dehydrogenase. And so, and that enzyme lives in a pathway that's similar to where you're going to process Tylenol, which is why you don't mix those two together. Having said that, so if you drink more and more and more, your tolerance goes up, but that's because you create more enzyme associated with breaking down alcohol. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is similar, not exactly the same, but it's similar in that the more THC you take, the more stimulants you take in your synapse, the more receptor sites your body will create. And so in order for you to get the same neurological effect, you're going to have to stimulate more of those receptor sites to get the same amount of high. And so this is the whole point, is that if you keep on ramping up in your dosing perpetually, you get to a point where it used to be okay to take a puff and then you're good, and now you have to kill a whole vape cart, you know, in order to feel it. And that's simply because of how many receptor sites you have to fill in order to get the same dose response.
So you brought up alcohol, Blake, but is this similar pathway to opioid addiction and opioid use? Because that's extremely dangerous, kills people.
Right. So what I would say is, typically speaking, with like opioids, you're also forming a dependence, and that dependence is influencing how your body responds to the opioids. So for example, if you take a lot of cannabis and you don't get the same effect, and then you quit cold turkey, you're not going to die from that. That's why we talk about cannabis not being addictive. It's not because it's not habitual. It's simply your body won't physiologically die from not having it. Whereas these deep synapses happen with opioids and so forth. And so the mechanism is similar, but it's not the same. And so this is what makes opioids and other addictive compounds that are truly addictive way more dangerous, and you're affecting a lot more in the pathways than simply stimulating single receptor sites or multiple receptor sites.
Well, and you bring up a really good point about the difference. And when it comes to reducing your opioids, you know, that's something that you want to talk to your medical provider about, your pharmacist. It's tricky, it's difficult. And that's what's so great about cannabis is you can take a couple of days off. Mm-hmm. You might be a little irritable. but you're definitely not going to die.
Yeah.
And it may help keep your costs down. It just seems like such a safer modality.
It's so much safer.
Yeah. So are there any favorite products that you have that you recommend to people when it comes to, trying to keep that tolerance low or trying to keep that dose very consistent for therapy?
So what I would probably pick is something like a tincture. If they needed to take a break, they could get like a 1 to 10 tincture, something a little lower. They don't have to stop their dosing completely, but it's not that really high concentrate that they've been using. It's something that they can still treat. A 1 to 10 tincture as well would be a great choice. Even an edible, as long as it has other cannabinoids in it. That's what I would pick.
So it's important to know that keeping your dose consistent over time or keeping that dose low as you can as a patient, if you're using medical cannabis, keep that dose as low as you can to maintain the therapy that you need. Increasing that dose may increase your tolerance and increase the need for tolerance resets. I recommend that you do that every quarter at least. We want to hear your stories about what you're using for tolerance resets. Again, you can go to utahmarijuana.org/guides to find our reset specifically. Stay safe out there.